Hello again everyone, and greetings from Essex. Now, on the last video we looked at Daniel chapter 1. I wonder whether you can remember anything from it. Daniel and his 3 friends were in training to serve the king of Babylon. And a big part of training, as some of you will know, is being tested. Daniel had been trained by King Nebuchadnezzar's officials, and now he was to be tested in his faith. Your faith will be tested. You are being tested now, even if you don't realise it. Of course, the difference is that your testing as a Christian in Gillingham is unlikely to be life-threatening. Daniel would find his life on the line. Anyway, let's read about it. Let's start Daniel chapter 2. In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. Let's pause there for a minute, because don't you find that a bit surprising? I mean, you'd think that his slaves would be the ones who couldn't sleep in their bare barracks. You'd think his servants would lie awake worrying at night, wondering if they've offended him somehow. I mean, what had the king got to worry about? Later on in the chapter, verses 37 and 38, this is how Daniel described the king. You, O king, are the king of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. Now, I've heard of Goldfinger, but Daniel called him Golden Bonce. Why should the king, who had everything, be troubled by his dreams and kept awake? Why do great and powerful men and women worry? Well, it's because great power brings great responsibility. And no, that wasn't first said by Spider-Man's uncle. That was said first of all by the philosopher Voltaire. How long had Nebuchadnezzar been king? Did you notice it? Less than 2 years. He was a new king, struggling with his great responsibilities. Have you ever struggled to sleep when you've taken on a new role somewhere? I remember once speaking on Jesus' words about moving a mountain, and I asked the congregation what the mountains were in their lives that they struggled to move, that were keeping them awake at night. Do you know what the big answer was that came back? Anxiety. I would suspect that some of you might even confess to anxiety keeping you awake. I'm sorry I can't see you actually, because I suppose there will be some of you nodding ruefully as I say that. Look, even your distinguished speaker might confess to sometimes anxiety keeping him awake at night. So if it's surprising, or perhaps it isn't, that the great King Nebuchadnezzar couldn't sleep, I'm going to suggest that it's shocking and scandalous that Christians lie awake at night worrying. You know, don't you, that we're not meant to do that. Let me read you some scriptures that will make you feel even more guilty about worrying. Philippians chapter 4 verse 6. Be anxious about nothing. John 14:1. Jesus himself said, do not let your hearts be troubled. Psalm 37 verse 8. Do not fret. It leads only to evil. Psalm 127 verse 2. The Lord grants sleep to those he loves. 1 John chapter 4 verse 18. Perfect love casts out fear, etc., etc. Look, according to God's plan, we should have no anxieties, or rather, if we do, we should be able to deal with them. We should sleep soundly every night. Anxiety robs us and diminishes us. So our theme today is peace of mind. Let's carry on with the story. Verse 2. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I've had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." The king was troubled. So whom did he consult? Whom do you consult? He called upon his magicians and astrologers, etc. Look, if a member of our congregation is troubled, what's better? To consult the Daily Mail horoscope or Madame Zelda at the end of the pier? Or is it not better to consult the church leaders and other Christian advisors? Well, let's see. How helpful were those astrologers? Verse 14. Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." The king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honour. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." Once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it." Then the king answered, "I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realise that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is just one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream and I will know that you can interpret it for me." The astrologers answered the king, "There is not a man on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among men." This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. The root problem here, of course, is that the king won't tell them what his dream was. Now, I suspect that anxiety is widespread in the church, but I don't know for sure, because how often have those of you who confess to anxiety consulted one another? How often have I, who confess to occasional anxiety, done that as well? We're far quicker to confess to a broken leg or heart attack than to some emotional or mental condition. Now, of course, the king could have been bluffing. He might not have been able to remember the dream. And that may hold people back too. We don't understand what's happening to us. I know that when I've had my times of emotional illness, I haven't been able to understand quite how ill I was. But I wonder as well whether there's another reason. A sort of fatalism, an acceptance that we're always going to be anxious and no one can do anything about it. And if we who are powerless share it with others who are powerless, we just make them anxious as well. So we keep it to ourselves. I remember speaking on Do Not Fret at a gospel hall in Essex way back in 1993. I looked it up. And a lady came to me afterwards and said, "Do not fret, but that's impossible." It's like the astrologers said here. There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. Well, if that's true, and we are on our own, then it is hopeless. Humans are anxious creatures, and we always have been. Look back in the early part of Genesis. Didn't Adam and Eve hide in fear? And if we've always been anxious, then we always will be, and we'll worry every night until we're dead. Now, I'll agree that the gods, plural, don't live among humans, but do you see where I'm going with this? Does God live among us? Does he love us foolish, anxious humans? Did he love Adam and Eve? Come to that. When he tells us to be anxious about nothing, is he mocking us because we can't help it? When Jesus said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled," did he say it to trouble us because we're troubled? When we're told that fretting leads only to evil, doesn't it count in Gillingham? When we quote verses to one another or ourselves to try and help, do we doubt them when we say them? Think back to Easter Sunday when Jesus rose from the dead and met his friends on that evening. They were in a locked room. Do you remember why the room was locked? For fear. In other words, they were anxious. So what was the first thing he said to them? "Peace be with you." And he showed them his hands and his side. So somehow peace, being free of anxiety, is connected to his hands and his side. How? Well, the scars there purchased our salvation and security. As we've already said, his perfect love casts out fear. So now, today, I want us to learn through Daniel's experience how to truly have and retain God's peace. Then we can model his peace and teach it to other anxious people. Then they will be able to see his hands and his side in us, his body on earth. And they too will be able to find peace. So let's read what happened next, verse 14. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went in to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. So, I think we've established that people are anxious, and that's because we are people. As we discuss anxiety today, please note that I'm not a psychologist. I'm not trained in psychology. No, consult a psychologist if you need to. We are looking for biblical truth in this chapter, guided by the one who, as Daniel said, gives wisdom and knowledge and reveals deep and hidden things. We don't despise clinical qualifications. Luke was a physician, wasn't he? But the Spirit will reveal things to us that a secular psychologist would miss. I googled what makes people anxious, and according to a learned list I found, common anxieties include social anxiety, phobias, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD, and something called GAD, G-A-D, general anxiety disorder, and this is characterised by chronic anxiety, exaggerated worry and tension, get this, even when there is little or nothing to provoke it. Do you see, therefore, how it's all about perspective? When there is little or nothing to provoke anxiety, anxiety gets provoked. It's how we see things. You see, my problems are real, but you need to pull yourself together. But no, because to the sufferer, they are real problems. And so was Daniel's. He and his friends were on death row because they couldn't answer a question that was impossible to answer. That's a real problem. Anyway, there's a hint in verse 13 that they were hiding. Men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends. Now, I'm not surprised if they were in hiding, but the fact is they weren't hiding very hard, because where did he find them? In Daniel's house. But they weren't seized because Daniel wasn't afraid to approach the commander, and when he did, he spoke to him with wisdom and tact. Now, we've already seen his wisdom and tact in chapter 1 when he was younger, and it seems that as he continued his studies and grew in knowledge and experience, he got even wiser and more tactful. That led him to build up a relationship with this man. Look, if we want to help one another, we'll need wisdom and tact. Tact is saying and doing the right thing. Daniel spoke tactfully and thereby saved many lives, as we'll see. I'd suggest, therefore, that we'll only need wisdom, because surely tact must come from wisdom, must be wisdom's daughter. Aren't the wise always tactful? If they weren't, they wouldn't be wise, would they? So where do we get wisdom from? That's a huge subject, but James says this, James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. How will it be given? Well, what did Daniel ask for when he saw the king in verse 16? He asked for time. As James says, God generously gives wisdom, but he gives it in his own time. It's an axiom that you can't get wise quickly. We've already mentioned Psalm 37, the do not fret psalm, but do you know what it says in verse 7 of that psalm? Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret. I remember when I was a new convert and read James's injunction to ask for wisdom, I remember sitting down, folding my hands and praying, and then expecting to be zapped with something and to become wise. But wisdom is gradual. Wisdom is cumulative, and wisdom is also collective. I learn from your wisdom as I hope you learn from mine, such as it is. As we grow wiser, we should grow more tactful. And what's the secret of tactfulness? Listening. As we listen to people, they gradually reveal their hopes and fears. Then we can apply wisdom and tact as we seek to help them. So as we ask for wisdom, we're actually asking God for time to grow wise, and he graciously grants it. That's exactly what Daniel did when he asked it of the king. And I presume he asked for it wisely and tactfully because the king graciously granted it. So what was Daniel going to do with it? How will we use our time? Well, what was the first thing he did? He shared the need with his friends, using their Hebrew godly names, not their Babylonian names. Now, is Twiddle Evangelical Church a place where people can share their needs. I do hope so. Okay, so now Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego knew all about it. What did they do? Did they worry about it? Did they cry out like Private Fraser, "We're doomed"? No. They prayed. There was a precedent in Genesis. Do you remember how Joseph had to interpret Pharaoh's dream? But it wasn't quite a precedent because Joseph knew what the dream was. They were actually asking God to do something new. If you've never escaped anxiety before, don't trust to precedent. Oh, it hasn't worked in the past. Ask for something new and something greater. Sleepless nights. We've all had them, I'm sure. However, I'd like to suggest that not all sleepless nights are a waste of time. What's the difference between verse 1, "In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, his mind was troubled, and he could not sleep," and verse 19, "During the night the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven." Well, Neb spent the night awake worrying and got nothing. Dan spent the night, either awake or asleep, seeking God and received what he needed. And what was his response? Praise. God cured his anxiety and Daniel praised him. Paul put it the other way round in his famous passage in Philippians where he said, "Rejoice in the Lord always." I'll say it again, rejoice. "Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Paul tells us to begin with rejoicing. Rejoice in the Lord always, he says, and then says do it again. But do note it's in the Lord. That's not the same thing as putting a smile on and pretending everything's okay. Then, when anxieties come calling, what are we to do with them? Present your requests to God. We do exactly what Daniel asked Shadrach and Benny to do. Pray about it. And what is prayer bathed in? Thanksgiving. It's the old song. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God has done. And when those anxieties keep on calling, as they may well do, what do we do with them? Paul says, convert them into good thoughts. Think about those things. So next time you're lying awake, think about what Psalm 127 verse 2 says. He grants sleep to those who love him. A sleepless night can be converted into a time of prayer and rest. And like Daniel, we'll wake up praising God. Anyway, Daniel was so happy that he wrote a psalm, verse 20. But I tell you what, I think we'll have to leave it there. And we'll learn about his psalm next time. Until then, thank you so much for listening, and bye for now.